So sit comfortably. We'll do a little meditation culminating with motivation for the class, as we did before. Sit with your spine erect, because some of you are seated. I won't say all the different postures that you can have for the 7-point or 8-point postures of Vairocana. Relax your body. Sometimes you can do it quickly, sometimes you almost have to scan the body as you're coming out from the road, driving, tension, whatever. And relax your mind, which I'm asking you to remind yourself. You don't have to think about anything else right now. Let go of other preoccupations, plans, worries. And as is mentioned at the beginning of so many sutras, when the Buddha came back from the alms round, washed his feet, he'd sat down in the cross-legged position and placed his attention on the breathing in front. So like that, let's begin with this relatively easy and gross level of calming the mind by placing your attention on the respiration, watching it in the sense of knowing when you're breathing in, knowing when it's stopped, knowing when you're breathing out, or being aware of that, being mindful of that, to the exclusion of all other thoughts. In essence, what you're doing is you're depriving the other thoughts in your mind from that which sustains them, their continuity, which is your attention. If you pay attention to things, the more you pay attention, the more they prolong, the longer they go. If you take your attention away from them, although they might still be there subliminally, the longer you take your attention away from them, those conceptualizing thoughts begin to subside, and you're left with a more calm mind. So that's one of the intentions here. So breathe through your nostrils, watching, being mindful of the respiration. As you're progressing, if you notice not all of your attention is on the breathing, try to recognize what else you are attending to, what other thoughts are being paid attention to, and withdraw your attention away from them and reinforce, so take that energy, that psychic energy, and put it into the attention of the breathing. Then with the mind somewhat calmed, bring your attention, let go of your mindfulness to the breathing. Put that attention instead on recognizing the mental consciousness itself. Remind yourself it's not the eye consciousness, your visual consciousness that you're paying attention to, not the ear, nose, tongue, body consciousnesses, but that entity, the mental consciousness within which you think, you plan, you remember, you judge. It's the consciousness that gets angry. Anger can arise within it. Anger doesn't arise within your five sense consciousnesses. Attachment, jealousy, pride, worry, your low self-esteem. Just watch the contents of the mind for some time. Without following the thoughts. They may come in succession. It might be one that's dominating that lasts a long time, or it might just be a succession of just associations. Visual, audio. By consciously not following any of the thoughts, if you notice your mind beginning to spend more on one, taking your attention away from that, try to see if you can find a space between the thoughts. Some periods when the mind seems to be relatively devoid of objects, so to speak, of that it's thinking about. When that happens, focus on that. Try to keep it longer, elongated. This can lead to an understanding, something you might call intuition or experience, that even when thoughts are present, the mind has a clear, unimpeded, unmessy, unbusy, calm state, like open space that has no objects in it, not filled with birds and warplanes and bullets and wind, just calm space, empty, unimpeding. It doesn't prevent thoughts from coming, and it doesn't sort of know, not like molasses, which would impede something from escaping from the mind. Just thoughts can come and go. It's only our attention to them that causes them to be prolonged. We don't have to be unhappy. We can let go of the mind that thinks of the causes of that bring unhappiness to our mind. We don't need to be irritated. We don't need to be angry. letting go of the thoughts, see if you can get an intuition of that clear nature of the mind. Call it clear light. Even if, here we're trying to see a state between the thoughts, that are empty, but even when the thoughts are present, using that to remind yourself that those thoughts could not be present unless they were occupying space of the mind, in the same way that a big rock or boulder occupies physical space. In so doing, let go of your attention to the objective thoughts and just try to perceive the clear light consciousness that surrounds them, so to speak, that provides the basis for their appearing, the subject mind rather than the object thoughts. One hindrance may be the seeming irrefutable presence of your physical body, palpably cognized there in contradistinction to the mind. Recognize that your mind is perceiving the presence of the body through a mental image, through its appearance to the mind, which you don't have to pay attention to. Try to perceive the consciousness to which the body image is appearing. Let go of your attention to the body as an object. As though just mind, no longer being so strongly aware of the body, although it will pulsate back in again. You have to, like in the Heart Sutra, where it says correctly and repeatedly meditating. You have to do meditation, you have to familiarize yourself, do them both repeatedly, and then when you get a glimpse of it, hold it single-pointedly. So your own mental consciousness, somewhat unencumbered with the thoughts that were pulsing through it before, not so obviously paying attention to the body. Now go deeper and recognize there is a sense of your self-identity, the observer, the controller, that still may be present. That too is appearing to your mind as a thought, as an image. Try to perceive the nature, the clear light nature of the mind within which that thought of the ego, the self, is there. And like the proverbial dakas and dakinis, those higher spiritual beings who, one of the etymologies of Dakini is she who flies through the space of non-conceptual wisdom. Let go of yourself and just dive in and fly in the space of the clear light nature of your mind. Recognize even your understanding of that clear light nature is yet itself not a direct realization, not an unmediated realization of the mind. It's something, a mental image we've built up of this clarity. Knowing that, let go of that image of the mind and try to perceive the even more subtle, clear spaciousness of the mind itself, within which our approximation of the image of the mind was embedded. No body, no ego. Just mind. This clear light nature of the mind is similar to the subtlemost clear light nature of the mind that we all have, that is more difficult to actualize. That subtlemost clear light nature is what will eventually become the omniscient mind when we become enlightened. This is an incredible resource that we can recognize now, having a life of leisure and endowment. The Buddha pointed out is so rare. Up till now, we've spent most of our life distracted, not practicing the Dharma. Maybe a third in sleep. How many hours we've spent looking for food, preparing it, looking for companionship, friendship, love, making money, spending, fighting. Very little time for the Dharma. And if you can make a resolution to try to devote more of our time, this perfect human rebirth, knowing that we have this resource of the mind which doesn't impede our developing good thoughts, new thoughts, and doesn't prevent us from eliminating the faults. It's totally without any viscosity, without any drag. Applying the right antidotes, we can get rid of our anger, our sadness, our attachment, our lust, our addiction, our low self-esteem. Those are of the present, and even those events that took place in the past, our memories, we can use as fuel for our realizations, recognizing, say, some negative actions of the past, great attachment or anger, at that point, there was no inherently existent me that did those actions. There were no inherently existing actions. Just appearances, mere appearances like dreams. There were no inherently existent recipients of my actions. People that I spoke harsh words to or beat or tried to seduce or to cheat. All living beings have exactly the same capacity as we. They've all been incredibly kind to us over numberless lifetimes. Sometimes giving their own lives numberless times as our mother, our father, our friends. Now we don't recognize them as such. But here in meditation, recognizing that, think that it would be unseemly for me to work just for my own welfare, spiritual welfare, for, say, the lesser nirvana rather than enlightenment. How wonderful it would be if I could become a resource for all the beings that I previously thought as distinct from me, enemies, strangers, actually benefit them. I think I'm going to listen to the discourse this morning, think about it, hear it, contemplate, meditate, in order to get closer to enlightenment, with the sole purpose of being able to benefit sentient beings, not solely for my own peace of mind, joy, calmness, but with that intention, like the dichotomy of the bodhisattva, mahasattva, one part of the mind aiming for bodhi, enlightenment, with the motivation to benefit all the multitude of living beings, implied by the word mahasattva, a person who is working for the great vehicle, the great destination of all living beings. Therefore, I'm going to pay attention to the discourse, to leave the imprints, understandings, to get closer to enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. This kind of motivation at the beginning contours all of the actions we do in this period, creates an envelope of virtue. The reason we're doing it, even our mind becomes distracted temporarily during the talk. We snooze off, we daydream. Motivation is the most important thing in determining the virtue or non-virtue of the actions. And then relax your mind, relax your body, bring your attention back to the present. How was your meditation? Okay. Any observations or questions? What was the gentleman then who came in the back? That was Mike?
Yeah.
Any observation or question?
I have observations about my experience, but I don't know if it's a good idea to necessarily share my experience at the moment.
Okay. You could, if there's some little tidbit you could toss out, just say what. But what I meant by observations, like, oh, it was difficult to do, or
It was very
I-
difficult to do for me.
very difficult. Have you meditated before, or you?
I've tried as, I mean, barely even an amateur, I guess I could say. I haven't had a lot of official, practice guidance.
Yeah, at the beginning, very difficult. And, but I think many of the people here, well, I say many, some of the people here who have done for some time, like anything, like your golf swing or tennis or squash or whatever, at first you're doing kind of artificially, one leg forward, this one twist, miss the ball, many, many times before you don't have to do things so artificially, and things flow. So the reason I say that is just to encourage to keep going. If you find that there might be something beneficial, like anything, like yoga, at first it's difficult to do some poses, but every time you do one, it acts as a support for the next time you do that pose. The muscles are a little more stretched, a little more able to go further with more ease. And here we're talking about the mind rather than the body, which has infinite capacity for development and transformation.
If I may say,
Yeah.
I came here because I read some of your biography on the website for the center,
Right.
and I've talked with this kind individual who's guided us here before on several occasions I've visited, and I had a good experience, and I felt I was speaking with intelligent, open-minded people, and some of the things I experienced personally are not things that necessarily people typically feel comfortable, in my experience, talking about, or
Right.
necessarily have experience talking about. And it's very difficult for me to find a way to understand or explain these things, and I kind of don't know really why I'm here completely, to be honest.
Well, that's fine. That's excellent. But we could talk during break. We can talk if you want later, or if you have any observations or questions during the class. Just like same for anyone. Just ask. So I'll let you relax again. I'm not trying to put you on the spot by asking if you had any observations.
I would like to say just one more
Yeah,
thing,
sure.
though, that
Of course.
he has mentioned this sort of, he's mentioned the word obscurity before, and in my experience, I experience a lot of what seems to be progressively more and more obscure as my experience in time continues, and I often feel that people I encounter seem to generally feel more comfortable with it. And so on one hand, I look to other people who may not really want to be looked at as being an individual who has a greater understanding. So I have a difficult time of necessarily trusting what I continue to follow or allow guide me, and I just think that the intelligent conversation is something I very much appreciate, so thank you.
In the time of the Buddha, spiritual people gave some discourse that the audience would say, sadhu, 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 which means well spoken, well said. So, thank you for that. Okay, so we're going to, just for auspiciousness, we're going to recite together, chant together this English translation of the Heart of Wisdom Sutra, which if you don't have, who's back there with where Mike is? Lisa?
Yes.
Is there a copy? Does Mike have a copy? So this is the subject matter of this weekend seminar. When the Buddha taught about emptiness, about the wisdom that understands the ultimate nature of reality. I think everyone else has to. Many occasions, they're called, usually they can all be encompassed in the groups of discourses called the Prajna Paramita Sutras. Prajna Paramita means the perfection of wisdom, or the wisdom gone beyond, the discourses on that. This is one of the most condensed. As I mentioned yesterday, there's one that's even shorter, the perfection of wisdom in one syllable. Do you remember that? Which is in Sanskrit is a particle that you add to say not, or no, or non-existing. Like what do we say in English? There's different prefixes. Uninteresting, George. Okay. So this is about, they call it 25 stanzas, although it's not written as in stanzas. So let's begin together. Thus did I hear at one time, the Bhagavan was dwelling on massive Vulture's Mountain in Rajgriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, but not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness. No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. No visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared, Tadyata Om Gate Gate Para Gate Para Samgate Bodhi Svaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world, gods, humans, asuras, and gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. So, auspicious. I think you can, Venerable, this sheet they can take with them? Yeah, so you can, if you are so inspired sometimes when there's difficulties in your life, if you have a chance to recite the Heart Sutra, even again and again, and try to contemplate on the meaning that we've been mentioning, and certainly embellished by other teachings you have received and will receive. This is just a little introduction. I remember one of my teachers, Sekun Sensho Rinpoche, used to say, whatever is not covered by one teacher, he was talking about Buddhas in general, but when Buddha comes to the world, gives teachings, there might be some subjects that don't seem to be covered, but other Buddhas later will fill in. So the same thing with teachers. You may receive teachings on the Heart Sutra. You may have had many before, may have had none before, but if you receive teachings again in the future, you may find that those fill in things that I've left out, that I haven't emphasized. Maybe just the time is different, and you will understand the same things that were explained now in a new way. So it's always good to go back and review these subjects that you've heard before after, 6 months, after a year, 2 years. Sometimes I read the notes of the first courses I took, some 45 years ago, and I thought, wow. I tried to take, at that point, being very anal memory and try to write everything down. I said, wow, there was Rinpoche was teaching, or the Lamas were teaching some very profound things that I can understand, appreciate a little bit more now as the years have passed, having gotten more information to understand what they were saying. Okay, so just as a recap, we're talking about an instance which the Buddhists, at least the Mahayana tradition, believe actually happened at the time of the Buddha. Some historians of Buddhism, scholars say, oh no, maybe this is just written, hundreds of years after the Buddha, and so forth. Generally, Mahayana practitioners believe this actually happened. The Buddha was seated on Vulture's Peak in India, which is in the far east side of India, on a mountain north of where he achieved enlightenment, and there were a lot of disciples around, whether they were physically present or whether with their divine ear, the ability to hear from long distances, maybe in other world systems, they were listening to the discourse or watching it with divine eye. Maybe some of them with psychic powers were hovering in space or whatever, but there were many people listening, and the Buddha, for the most part during this discourse, remains in concentration. He doesn't say anything, he's just there, inspiring by his presence, having given teachings before, having his disciples there. Shariputra, the great foremost in wisdom of the Buddha's disciples, the hearers in Shravaka, the Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas, the main famous disciples at the time who practiced discipline and were trying to achieve nirvana. Shariputra is inquiring of Avalokiteshvara, who's known as a bodhisattva, also an Arya being, someone who's realized emptiness directly. He's asking him, implying, say, I know how the hearers and solitary realizers practice wisdom, their training in wisdom, to try to realize selflessness to achieve nirvana. But what is the Bodhisattva training like? How did the Bodhisattvas train in the perfection of wisdom? And then the most of the rest of the sutra, with one or two exceptions, is when Avalokiteshvara is giving a very brief answer to that, which is the heart of essence of the perfection of wisdom. He refers to, he calls Shariputra by his name, and we mentioned how he said that someone who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this. They should think about it this way: correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty, of inherent nature. You can say those five aggregates. What this means, I mentioned, was generally in the hearers and solitary realizers, those vehicles, Shravakayana, we say, Pratyeka Buddhayana, and then you could say a third yana, the Mahayana, when we talk about the three vehicles. You may not know that, you may not have heard that much about the Pratyeka Buddha. There are other disciples, like the Shravakas, who had a little attitude of not so much wanting to be with the crowd or be always under the guidance of a teacher. Once they'd heard the teachings from Buddhas in the past, they may had a very strong vow that in future lives they would always practice when there were no Buddhas in the world. Kind of like, there's an old commercial I remember, maybe it's many years ago, and not the ladies in the kitchen washing the dishes and her mom is trying to help her out or something. She says, "Mother, please, I'd rather do it myself." Do you remember that? I think it was some dishwashing detergent. So the Pratyeka Buddha is a little like that. I'd rather do it myself. So they're sometimes called solitary realizers, although they sometimes grouped in sometimes other Pratyeka Buddhas. They're not yet Buddhas. The word Buddha there means realizer. They like to make their realizations when the Buddhas are not present. I'll mention in the Jataka Tales talk on Wednesday also that when the Buddha, before the Buddha came to be reborn, to take rebirth in the mother's womb, his mother's womb, this Shakyamuni Buddha, he was in the reigning monarch of what's called Tushita Pure Land. Have you heard that? Descent from Tushita into mother's womb. And before he came, many of the Bodhisattva disciples there came to the earth with one of their chores was to particularly seek out Pratyeka Buddhas who were in the earth, present on the earth, and to tell them that the Buddha was coming, because they would want to know that so they could skedoodle, and they could leave. So the very famous incident in what eventually was called Deer Park in India, where the Buddha first taught the Four Noble Truths. That park had another name as a result of this incident. There were a group of Pratyeka Buddhas there, and the Bodhisattva came and said, "Oh, a wheel-turning Buddha, a universal Buddha will be born soon." And they, recognizing that, with their psychic powers, they rose into the air, levitated, and then consumed their own bodies with the fire element, spontaneously combusted, and their mind streams continued on to take rebirth somewhere else. And those ashes that fell, the individuals like that were also, one of the names in India were called rishis. Do you know the word rishi from Nepal? What does that mean? Do you know?
One who has meditated for a long, long time.
Can be.
And attained.
Yeah. Sometimes rishi has the implication, especially the way that's translated in Tibetan, drangsong, someone who's totally honest, um, and if they make a curse against you, that's bad because it'll happen. But particularly if they prophesy something, it's reliable. They're great meditators. So this area where the ashes of those Pratika Buddhas fell became called, is another name for Deer Park is Rishi Patana. Rishis, where the rishis, meaning the ashes of the rishis, fell, Patana. So, so those disciples, the Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas, are all working for nirvana. And the main object that they take to be eliminated from the mind, the main obscuration, like Mike was saying that Venerable used the word obscuration or obscuring sometime in his talks. The main obscuration that they were aiming to eliminate was a particular state of mind that viewed the ego, let's say this is the mind, the ignorant mind, that's viewing this sort of like apparition of the ego, the self, and believing it, holding it, assenting to that vision, like someone who sees a shadow on the wall and whose ignorant mind is convinced that's a demon, or the boogeyman. I mentioned just some of the talk before. The boogeyman. That consciousness that's perceiving something that doesn't really have a basis in fact, like a reflection in a mirror, or like a dream, it appears so real and captivating that the mind at that point grasps to it, assents to it, holds it as true. That consciousness that's holding it is the fundamental thing to be eliminated from the mind. It's the fundamental ignorance we call ego grasping. Does that make sense? You've heard that?
Innate.
Yeah, it can be both formed by concepts, but the one really, the fundamental thing to be getting rid of is the innate version of that that's just has been there from lives when we were born in other realms, as animals, as insects, as spirits. Yeah, Lisa.
It strikes me that that's the
It is Lisa, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It just strikes me that that's the same part of the brain that tries to make sense of things. That's trying to make sense of things, but not that same.
So here, it's interesting you say brain. From the Buddhist perspective, the brain is not the mind. Although we usually, when we think a lot, you feel, oh man, my brain. The brain can act as a, how do I say, in computer language, you know what RAM is? Random access memory, like you have enough RAM. It's different than the hard drive. The hard drive is what has all your data on it. The RAM is what gets infused with some temporary things, like in this case, like memories. Like I kind of think of the brain as kind of RAM. So you can do experiments that seem to indicate that certain places in the brain are receptacles of short-term memory, but from a Buddhist perspective, those memories are still present within the mind, and that meditators, even if they were to have operation that would remove part of the brain, they could reconstruct those pathways and memories, and new pathways could be then generated within the brain. But generally, Buddhism says that the mind is something which is formless, and therefore the brain, it cannot be equated with the brain itself. Okay? Although the brain is related with some of our mental activities, many of our mental activities, especially in the death process and so forth, the mind in its more subtle forms remains independent of the brain. Okay? Yeah.
How would you describe the concept of self?
Concept of self. So here there's the Buddha, oftentimes we hear the word selfless. The Buddha taught there was no self. It doesn't mean what it sounds like. As a, remember, Mike, right?
Yes.
So Mike is a person. Mike has a self, or you could say this, Mike is a self of persons. But the way that that actually exists is much different than we conceive of ourselves as Mike. Here's another mic in the front row, so we can use two mics here. The way that this mic or that mic think of ourselves now is that this appearance of Mike. So what is self? What is the self of Mike? Mike is just a name that we give to this combination of body and mind. Just a name. Call that self, that Mike. Where's Mike? He's in Washington, D.C. Where? He's over in Fairfax. Where? At the Guya Samaja Center. Someone walks through the door and says, where's Mike? And then someone points to this Mike, that Mike. But we're not satisfied with that. Just the name Mike, that somehow is represented by this appearance of body and mind. We think that there must be something within that, some autonomous self, soul, It's sort of like, I think, who was it, Aquinas, in Christian tradition, Aquinas or someone said there was no need to prove the existence of the soul because it was so apparent. I think that's what he was talking about. There was the object of innate grasping is so apparent, not recognizing the Buddha's special realization, unlike any other founder of other religions, unlike the tenets of any other religions, Buddhism said that that is the fundamental problem. Believing in a encrusted version of that self, the subtle self that does exist, exaggerating it, not through your own error, but because of habit energy from beginningless time, it appears to be really there from its own side, not just a name. And for me to say that to you make no sense at all right now if you haven't heard this or had a chance to encounter it, think about it. Like a very famous incident in some 100 years after the Buddha, there was a king, Greek king, because a couple 100 years after the Buddha, the Greek Empire, I think after Alexander, had left various, people in charge of various regions. So there was a king, King Milinda. Do you know this? The questions of King Milinda? Do you know?
Yeah, I have both two volumes.
You have two volumes. Translated into Mongolian?
No, into English.
Oh, in English. Okay. The questions of King Milinda. The King Milinda was he was a very smart fellow. So he would ask Hindu, Buddhist people to come, and he would debate philosophy with them. That was his pleasure. So he was the king. He could get he'd just tell the ministers to. He heard about one monk who was very wise and he hadn't had a chance to meet or debate with, called what? Do you know? What was the monk's name?
I haven't read that book yet.
Okay, so now you're going to have to go and read it. You've got it in your library.
Yes, I want.
Don't be that kind of person whose library, all the books, none of them have been cracked open. Even if you don't read them, you're cracked so that when people come, they think, oh yeah, he's read those books. The questions of King Milinda. So the person who was invited was called Nagasena. He was a Buddhist bhikshu, monk, and very wise and knowledgeable about emptiness, selflessness. So when he first arrived, he came in some kind of cart or chariot or something, chariot sounds like biblical or something, but some kind of thing with being drawn by animals. And I can't remember exactly how the conversation goes, but mainly at the very beginning, the first interaction is about, the king is asking him, oh, who are you? He says, or maybe Nagasena asks to the king or something, but the conversation comes around very quickly to, what is the cart? is the cart the wheels, the spokes, within the rims, the hub, the axle, the carriage, the reins, and all of these different parts, I don't know, I'm not,
I think the question was, how did you come here? And
oh, how did you, yeah.
and who did come here?
Yes, you're right, but I was thinking, why did what was the origin of the king saying, how did you come here? But so he said he came by a cart and so forth, and Nagasena begins to analyze in that way. When you think about it, you take apart the parts of your car. Mike, back in the back there, what kind of car do you have? Do you have a car?
Yes.
What is it?
What do you mean by that?
What brand?
It's a Honda.
Honda. So Mike's Honda. So we take it apart. We want to find the essence of Honda. We say, Mike has a worry. Oh, my Honda is some kind of belief that it's my Honda. We take it apart. We take the outer skin, whatever it be, metal or some plastic or something. We put it in a pile. We take out the petroleum. We take out the glass and the various parts. We put them down. We're almost feeling that there must be something left that's the Honda. It's not in any of the parts. We can't find the Honda in the headlights or the medallion, even though you might say, oh, that's the Honda, the medallion, because it says Honda. It's not in the plastic, not in the carpeting inside, the seats. It's not in the engine, not the spark plugs. There's nothing that you can point out in those parts that's Honda.
You're
Go ahead.
saying it's a factor of time.
It's a factor, a subtle factor that we've gotten used to calling that collection of parts, that function, a Honda. And as though once having given that name, that there really is a Honda there, something called Honda, a self-identity of Honda. Same thing with the chariot, that Nagasena's questions from King Milinda. There are many questions about the self and selflessness. So you have to break open those two books now. So Mike has many parts. All the two Mikes here have many parts. They have body parts, they have mental parts, but you can't find the self that we believe, when we think, I, Mike. It seems like there really is a Mike right there, but you can't find it in any of the parts. So you might be led to think, well, therefore it's like the Christian soul or the Hindu soul. It exists independent of the body. If it were really independent in the way that it appears to our mind, when you stuck a needle in your hand, you wouldn't think, ow, I have been stuck. If someone criticized you, you wouldn't think, oh, they've abused me. I was going to make some political comment, but I was going to try to subdue myself today.
Get over it.
Face fake news or something like that. Go on, Mike.
Do you think experience is something that is part of the self?
Our experiences and the memories, the things that we did.
Not in the past, but in this moment.
Yeah, in a sense, they're not what we generally not amongst the things that we label the self onto. We label the self onto some changing, but more or less stable set of things we call the 5 aggregates, the 5 heaps, 5 skandhas. The body, the fundamental consciousness, and then the various mental states, anger, attachment, feelings, discriminations, things like that. So our experiences, you might say if you're experiencing feeling, yeah, that could be part of what's labeled, understood to be Mike. So anyway, the main point I'm getting at here is that the hearers and the pratika Buddhas, hearers and solitary realizers, use English words, or Shravakas and pratika Buddhas, use the Sanskrit name, their main thing to be eliminated was the grasping at the self of the person. To them, their philosophical outlook at first, although it evolves over time, is that the rest of the body and the mind, the basis upon which you label the person, they exist. Like the example I gave is the forest and the trees. If you cut down the trees, is there still a forest? If all the trees burn, you see, there's Johnson Forest or Young Forest or Schmidt Forest or something. If you burn down all the trees, is there still a forest? We might still memorialize that area. I was joking today, Young Forest, and you go, it's just a plain with the cows eating the grass and everything. But generally, forest is something we recognize, it's just an intellectual construct. It's something that you impute or label upon a collection of trees. You can't find forest in any one of the trees, in between the trees, or independent of the trees. If it were independent of the trees, you'd have forest even without the trees when they burn down. Same thing with the self. The self, from this fundamental first understanding that to be eliminated, to overcome our problems, our obscurations. An obscuration is, this ignorance is an obscuration in that it prevents us from seeing reality and making, spiritual progress. So it's believing this appearance is kind of a double appearance. The merely imputed I, merely designated I, is very difficult. We don't have any kind of experience of how that appears to the mind, but it's said that does appear to the mind, but immediately is merged with an appearance of an inherently existing I, as though the I isn't just labeled, but actually exists there from its own side.
Venerable, in that example about forest and trees,
Yes.
so trees are substantial causes
Are-
for
substan-
forests to be a primary cause as a label to exist. And similarly,
What we say, the relationship between the two is that the trees themselves are, from their philosophical point of view, are said to be substantially existent from their tenets. From Mahayana point of view, they're also, then there's no substance there. But anyway, on the basis of those a group of substantially existent things, you can impute things that are called imputedly existent phenomena, such as a forest, or say a rosary. Where's my rosary? Anyway, a rosary, any from that Hinayana point of view, each bead is substantially existent, and the string that strings them together is substantial. They really exist. Like the aggregates, from the point of view of the Hinayana, aggregates really there. There's some substance there, and the self is just labeled onto them. Same way the beads and the string are really there. This is kind of good. This is kind of like the mental things, and the string is like or the string is like the mind, and these are like the body parts or something. The rosary, we think, we call this a rosary. We look at it and we say this is a rosary or a garland or whatever you want to call it. What else do people call it? The Tibetan word mala or Indian word mala or something. Tibetan word tengwa. It's almost as though there's really something, but if you analyze it, where's the tengwa, where's the mala? If you cut the string and all the beads are around, it's very difficult to have a perception of rosary. Because rosary is when they're connected in a certain way, and then we impute that as rosary. Same way when the body parts are cut apart, has been burned, cremated, or buried, we don't say that Rajiv. That's Rajiv. Or some people might say that's Rajiv. But when when the mind has left the body and the body maybe is burned, we don't have a basis for labeling Rajiv any longer.
So those 5 heaps of Rajiv does substantially exist.
From the Hinayana point of view. From Mahayana point of view, that's the whole point here. What did he say? Behold those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent existence. From the Shariputra's point of view, his philosophical standpoint, although he may actually have been a bodhisattva manifesting as a hearer, there's debate in maybe Shariputra and all of these original disciples that were looking to attain nirvana, maybe they were all really bodhisattvas or emanations of the Buddha that were here sort of enacting this drama for others. Okay, with that proviso, from his point of view, the aggregates do substantially exist, inherently exist, and it's upon that stable inherent basis that you can label the self, which is then misapprehended by ignorance as being a real self, a substantially existent self. That's a gross level of of talking about selflessness. It's not the subtlemost, but it's good enough. Get over it. Yeah, Lisa.
So, forgiveness is really.
A little bit louder.
I'm sorry if this is a really stupid question, but I've never gotten a sense of, I'd always thought there was such a large interdependence upon everything. I'm now deducting a sense of individuality. We really are individuals. Is that right? Or is
We
that
are
wrong?
conventionally individuals.
Even as we.
Yeah, each, like for instance, when you pass away, hopefully not soon, when you pass away, there will be a continuity of your subtle mind and subtle wind, sort of like subtle body, subtle mind, which will have the imprints of all of the karmic seeds that still exist in your continuum, and that will dictate your future, the contour of your future, whether born as a human or a god or an animal, or whether you have very good tendencies as a child, or whether you're the kind of child who sees insects and smashing them with rocks because of past instincts. Those are your own individual experiences that get the contour of your individuality. When you achieve enlightenment, it's said that in a certain sense all enlightened minds are the same, but one can understand that as meaning all enlightened minds have exactly the same ability, same knowledge, same abilities, yet still, even as in enlightenment, it's said that certain Buddhas, like say, because of the karmic connections you yourself, as Lisa have made with groups of, maybe as a bodhisattva, on the bodhisattva path, the karmic connection you made with individuals predispose you, even if many, many Buddhas appeared as a certain teacher to those people in the future, those disciples that you personally have a karmic connection with, they will be more affected by your emanation. Even all of them look the same, of different Buddhas. They all have emanations that are teaching. They will somehow be drawn to yours because of the karmic connection with you. So it's said that that's why, one of the reasons why you shouldn't think, oh, what's the need for me to become Buddha? There's numberless Buddhas. There's some people that can be more quickly led by you, even when you become Buddha. Okay, so there is that individuality, even up in that stage. So Avalokiteshvara's sort of startling statement here is that, hey, listen, Shariputra, the bodhisattvas don't look just at the emptiness of the self, but even the emptiness of the aggregates upon which the self is labeled, the parts. So like the sort of shattering Shariputra's preconceptions here, or the doctrine that Shariputra represents. And then we talked a little bit about form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, form is not other than emptiness. If I were to take the time to go into all the details of that, it would be like a couple of weeks of seminar. But I tried to give the synthesis of what that's getting at. It's this apparent paradox of the relationship between a conventional truth and its ultimate truth, its emptiness. Conventional truths are, every phenomena has two truths. A conventional truth and an ultimate truth. Let's say an apple has its conventional truth that we see, red, maybe red or yellow, what is it, sort of greenish, sweet taste and skin and seeds and all of this sort of thing. This is its conventional nature. And it also has an ultimate nature, which is its ultimate nature is emptiness. The emptiness of the apparent existence of that apple as existing from its own side, not just a name that we give to that collection of parts. Oh, that's an apple. But it seems like there's something really there. Apple, appleness, the self of apple. The emptiness of the apple is a state in which there is no conventional phenomena, no skin, no sweetness, no stem, no pulp, no juice, like no eye, no ear, no nose. The mere vacuity of what was previously, when you look at the conventional phenomena, previously perceived to be inherently existent, because naturally is going to appear as, to anyone other than a Buddha, to the sense powers, always things appear to be inherently existent. You label them, the mere label, like a rainbow, but immediately, because of infinite, beginningless familiarity, the phenomena appears to be inherently existing there, not just labeled. They can't be separated by a mind other than the Buddhas. They can be separated. You can perceive just the absence of this one. Let's see my hands here. This is the one that does exist, just the conventional eye. Okay? Here's the naturally appearing inherent existence of that we can't control. It appears because of the imprints from beginningless time. We can't separate one from the other right now, but when we meditate on emptiness, what we're doing is we're proving the non-existence of this one. Right? You following? Like you're just looking through me. Are you just pretending to look at me, or are you?
No, I thought it was the other hand.
Okay, so this is like the rainbow. This is like the rainbow. Just the merely imputed apple, or merely imputed Mike. Or,
She just separated you.
yeah. Here's immediately, as soon as you give the name Mike or apple or mug, immediately it appears to your mind that there is something there that's worthy to be called apple. It's like existing from its own side, an inherently existing apple. Or
Produced.
Come again? Produced?
Instantly produced.
Instantly produced, instantly appearing there. When we meditate on emptiness, we don't deal with this nominally existent self at first. We come to know that later. We prove the non-existence of this inherently existent apple or self. This is one, okay? So when we meditate on emptiness, we're meditating on this one as how could it be, and then we use various reasonings to prove, to show the absurdity that this would actually exist, to prove that this doesn't exist. When we have the certainty of that, all that appears is vacuity, the mere absence of that inherently existent apple, or inherently existent self, or mug, or whatever it might be. Then when we arise from that, and we see apple, mug, mic, whatever again, we're left in, once we've had experience of emptiness, and we're sure that it doesn't exist, but it appears, and then we come to understand that the only way that it could function is that there is a nominally existent, imputedly existent apple, mic, mug, self, whatever, that is obscured by this appearance of inherent existence. So what Avalokiteshvara is saying here, that the bodhisattvas, he's very sort of like very, I can't remember the word, very essential ingredient for them to think, not only is the self empty of inherent existence, the basis upon which you're imputing it, that also is empty of inherent existence. The aggregates, the five aggregates also. And so the form is empty, emptiness is form was, when I was talking about the essence of what that is talking about is that, what's the relationship between a conventional truth and an ultimate truth? They're not exactly the same. You can't say they're the same, because a conventional truth, nothing can be both truths. One thing cannot be both truths. It is either a conventional truth or an ultimate truth. It is either a conventionality or an emptiness. So you can't say that form is identical to emptiness. The form of the apple, or an apple, is identical with its emptiness. Because the conventional apple is a conventional truth, its emptiness is an ultimate truth. Also, you can't say they're completely different, on the other hand. If they were different, you could even if you perceive the emptiness of the apple, because it's completely different over here, no relation with the apple, then that wouldn't affect your perception of the apple to realize that it doesn't exist that way. They're completely different. Mike, back to
How would you describe truth?
How would I describe truth? I myself would depend on how it's defined in the Buddhist perspective, and that is, a truth is something that it's the way that it looks is the way that it is. And the example I gave is sometimes like you've got a bad neighbor who his head is in between you and Linda's eyes. Yeah, thank you. You've got a bad neighbor who every day is moving his fence on your property. Like his yard is getting bigger, yours is getting smaller. Does that sound familiar? Is your neighbor done it?
No.
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying. I thought she was looking like you. Yeah, that's our neighbor. But he comes out and smiles at you with a big smile. His appearance as friend and friendliness is a falsity, is not true. It doesn't reflect his true nature as being, an honest, someone who's on your side and everything. The reflection of the moon in a pool of water. Have you ever seen, or when you see, sometimes in the daytime even, there are pictures of a lake, and you can see the reflection of things in the lake. It looks so, if there aren't many ripples, it looks like this, the same thing twice, the buildings and the reflection of the building. But at night it's very stark. A deer can come to that pool of water and see the moon there and be confused, bemused. It's as though there's a real moon there. Something appears Undoubtedly, and it can function, you know, can enthrall you, it looks beautiful, can reflect the light around, but it doesn't exist in the way that it appears that it might be the same as the moon up there. It's empty of being real moon. It's just a reflection. Or seeing yourself reflected in the glass door of a big hotel when you're walking in and you think, oh, the person has the same clothes I have on, and you turn and you see it's just a reflection of yourself. At first, before you had the wisdom, you mistook that reflection to be real, a real person. Then when you look at it, you see, well, there's something there. It's appearing, but it's empty of being a real person. Does that make sense? If I use the word empty that way? It's empty of being a real person. It's devoid of being a real person.
That sounds like you're describing phenomena.
Yes. And the self also, you know, the self also appears like that to the mind as though it was a real findable self. But with wisdom, one can understand it's actually devoid of a findable self. It still will appear, even when you've realized that, it still appears, but then you can laugh it off. You almost can like it becomes ironic, you know, wow, illusion-like. We call it the illusion-like meditation on emptiness. When you arise from meditation on emptiness and you realize all these things are actually empty of inherent existences, it's almost like, wow, how fascinating. It's like a dream. In fact, people can use dreams then to enhance their meditation on emptiness if they can keep continuity of awareness in the dream and recognize, wow, this seems so real, but this is just a dream. Because if you can can anyone do that? Know that you're dreaming? Much of the time when you have a dream, you're just in the dream, and it's though that's real. But with a certain kind of practice, maybe imprints from practicing the past, you can be aware, I'm dreaming. This is just a dream. And that can help to as a aid to understanding when you're awake, to think, this also is like a dream. It seems so real, but it's empty of inherent existence. So, phenomena are not, conventional truth and ultimate truth are not identical. They're not totally different. The solution that the Buddha himself explained, implied, and through the various scriptures comes out is that the way to say it is that conventional truth and its emptiness are one nature, one entity, but conceptually different. When you actually conceive of them, when you think of them, they can be understood necessarily as different. Like the two sides of a coin. You know, the heads and tails, or what do you say, the front and the back, they form one entity. You can't separate them as a coin. You might, like I said, you can argue, you can cut it with a very fine saw, but then it's not one coin any longer. It's not a coin, it's some kind of trick you made in your basement. So the two truths are like that, the two sides of the medallion. Who's Italian here? Due facce del medallion. Two sides of the coin. They are one entity, but conceptually different. Conventional truths have certain qualities, general characteristics and specific characteristics. Their emptinesses, which are the same entity, still have different qualities. Specific qualities, general qualities. Okay? Does that make sense?
Conventional truth, ultimate truth.
They
Same
are
entity,
Yeah, well,
but different conceptions.
different we call them different conceptual isolates, you could say, but they are conceived of, when they're perceived, they appear differently to the mind as individual things, when you just focus on one, yet they form one entity. But that doesn't mean all emptiness. Every phenomena has its own emptiness. We gave the example of the cup yesterday. The emptiness of the cup exists as long as the cup exists. The emptiness of the cup came into existence when the cup was first labeled, when there was enough characteristics here, when the factory, when finally when the color was on, you say, oh, the mug, cup. At that point, there is an emptiness of the cup. That continues to exist permanently, unchangingly, whereas the cup is impermanent and changing. It's another characteristic of the difference of characteristics between the ultimate truth and the conventional truth of the cup. When this cup is broken or destroyed, falls on the floor, and no longer is called cup, the emptiness of cup is no longer existing. So it's called a temporary, yeah, there we go, a temporary permanent phenomenon. Sometimes we confuse permanent, and we think permanent means everlasting. That's not what permanent means in Buddhism. So, for instance, what is something which is everlasting but impermanent? Huh? You get a free cookie if you...
The sun and the moon.
Sun and the moon, no.
Our mental continuum?
Our mental continuum.
Yeah, the compassion, loving kindness is everlasting.
Well, it may not have had an origin in someone's mind yet, so that's not necessarily everlasting. But the continuum, our mental continuum, has existed since beginningless time and will continue even through Buddhahood. But it's changing moment by moment. So there's something which is everlasting. What about something which is, well, yeah. That's the reason the mental continuum is, especially in Tantra, is held as a special focus of practice. To realize its emptiness has a very special value. Let me just go a little bit further so that by the time we break for lunch, we'll have just a little bit more. We don't have that much more to finish in the sutra, but I wanted to be able to go back over some. So then there was another section. That section, form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, form is also not other than emptiness, is sometimes called by the commentaries, I don't think the Buddha called it, but it's sometimes called the fourfold profundity. It's very famous. People say if they say Heart Sutra, they just quote those four things. Then Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Those 8 things are sometimes called the eightfold profundity. I didn't mention much about that. I may go back to that a little bit later. And then yesterday we finished essentially this next paragraph. Shariputra, therefore in emptiness, that means in this is talking about to the meditative equipoise of the Buddhist practitioner, whether it be a bodhisattva or a shravaka or a hearer who's realizing emptiness. There is no form to that perception. There is no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness. Those refer to the 5 aggregates. And then no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind refer to the 6 faculties. Not the gross eyeball, when we say there's no eye, E-Y-E. It doesn't mean there's no eyeball. It's referring to the faculty, the visual faculty, which is said, in the gross matter, to be a subtle matter, subtle substance in the back of the eye, in the retina, within the rods and cones, even more subtle than the rods and cones that are understood by Western physiology to be the place that are kind of receptors of color and shape and so forth. There's a subtle matter there that acts as an interface between visual consciousness and the aspect of the object, say the appearance of that's reflected on or projected upon your retina. consciousness and the object don't meet just there, they meet within that subtlemost matter called the eye faculty. Similar within the ear, within your arm and hammer. There's some philia, some little things there that sense the pressure. That's not the subtle matter. It's some matter within that that's even more subtle than that, that is called the ear faculty. Same thing with the nose, the tongue, and the body. The mental faculty is any previous moment of mental consciousness that can act to empower that consciousness. Then, so those, when it says no eye, no ear, no nose, and so forth, that's referring to these 6 faculties, or 6 sense faculties. Then it says there is no visual form, no sound, no odor, and so forth. This is referring to the 6 objects of those consciousnesses. We gave some details about that. Those 6, 2 sets of 6 together are called what? Do you know?
Elements.
Elements?
They're called the 12 ayatanas or entrances, because they, by coming together, they're a way to enter into consciousness, for consciousness to be entered into. Then we said there is no I dhatu, no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. So this is talking to when you even make another set, 6 faculties, 6 sense faculties, and their respective objects, and then the 6 consciousnesses. See, these are called the entrances to give rise to 6 consciousnesses. If you add the 6 consciousnesses, now you have 18. Those are called the 18 dhatu, or one way translated here, elements. So we have 3 categories of things, very famous, that the Buddha talked about. 5 aggregates, 12 entrances, 18 dhatus. All phenomena can be found within either the, even the 12 entrances include all phenomena. The 18 dhatus include all phenomena. Do the 5 aggregates include all phenomena?
Mm-mm.
Why not?
That's just a self. It's not the whole phenomenon. Unless you believe the mind creates the whole world.
No, by form aggregate, it doesn't have to be only in a body. This is form aggregate. All of these things are form aggregate. So the form aggregate, does that, I mean, not form aggregate, does the 5 aggregates include all phenomena?
Yeah, they do.
Like the 12 entrances and the 18 dhatus include all phenomena. The 5 also include. I learned this in Italy. You don't move the hand, it's just the finger. Is anyone Italian? Mike, are you Italian?
No,
No.
I guess, maybe, I don't know.
Maybe, yeah. You look a little Italian.
I want to be Italian.
Chinese, do they, or Vietnamese? Anna, are you Vietnamese or Chinese?
Chinese,
Chinese. Did the Chinese do this? Chinese mother?
no.
No, this must be more Italian. So the 5 aggregates include all impermanent phenomena, whereas the 12 entrances and 18 dhatus include all phenomena, permanent and impermanent. The 5 aggregates, of those 5 aggregates, there is nothing which is permanent. So they don't include all phenomena, but anything that's impermanent can be divided into 5 aggregates, especially the person, because the person is impermanent. So there's talking, when it says no I element and so on, it means I dhatu. So there are 18 dhatus. So this is just an abbreviation for that. So for those bodhisattvas who would know that. Then he says there is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death and no extinction of aging and death. Doesn't mean these things don't occur conventionally. It just says in emptiness, in that meditative equipoise on emptiness that knows the ultimate truth, none of these things can stand up. None of these things exist because they all appear to be inherently existing. And so to that direct realization of non-inherent existence, direct realization of emptiness, ultimate truth, none of these things exist. It doesn't mean that they don't conventionally exist. Death conventionally exists, right? And extinction, what is the extinction of aging and death? What does that mean?
No extinction? No.
It says there's no, yeah, right, but presumably, because conventionally there is something called extinction of aging and death. What is extinction? Because we know what aging and death is. What's the extinction of aging and death?
Conventionally?
Yeah, conventionally. It's like me trying to get a couple more minutes to think about the question. You mean conventionally in Detroit or only in Chicago?
No birth, no death.
So it means that when one has reached the end point of nirvana, one has extinguished birth and death, because one no longer will take birth due to uncontrolled karma. One can still take rebirth out of prayer, like the higher beings, like the bodhisattvas, once even they've extinguished all of the delusions, reached the point of essentially nirvana, and it was called the eighth bhumi in the bodhisattva path. They can still take rebirth through the power of prayer. It's not uncontrolled. It's up, So when it says extinction of, when it talks about birth and death, that is what we have to experience now due to our karma, uncontrolled. When you reach nirvana, you have extinguished birth, uncontrolled birth and death. Okay, but even that exists conventionally, but it doesn't exist ultimately. It doesn't exist the way it appears. It's like a rainbow, just merely imputed. Right now, to our ears and to our minds, that doesn't sound like much of a distinction. But if you have a little bit of experience, say, in the meditating on the selflessness of the person, and you realize when you arise from that, you see the ego is still appearing. You've just realized that it doesn't exist that way, but it still appears to be inherently existing. You can understand the immensity of this kind of realization. And then finally, there's no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. That means the emptiness of the Four Noble Truths. Within the meditative equipoise on emptiness, even they do not exist. It's not like there's something sacred somewhere that in the emptiness still exists, findably, inherently. Nothing exists inherently. Even emptiness itself. There is no gnosis, exalted wisdom. Yeah. I remember Geshe Zopa, you think, I said gnosis, not gnosis. There's something about noodles also, but I can't remember what that was. He said, not Italian noodles. I can't remember that. There's no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. So you might think on the path, oh, I have not yet attained the realization of the perfect human rebirth. I haven't attained realization of impermanence, guru devotion. Conceiving of it that way, the mind grasping to that, believing you have an inherent non-attainment, that prevents you realizing. It's conventionally just like this airy-fairy non-attainment, just merely non-attainment. That doesn't mean you can't attain that. And if you do have some realization, attainment of some quality, understanding, there might be a mind that grasps to that and think, I've attained this, I'm higher than those people, I've got a good heart, or I've got bodhicitta, I'm a Mahayanist, or something like that. Whereas other people are, not realizing that within emptiness, there's no attainment either. That's just a name that we label to a particular dependent arising. Can't be found there. Even the Buddha doesn't exist inherently. Yes, sir.
What is permanent in the 12 entrances or the 18 dhatus? You made a distinction.
Yeah.
I understand what.
So let's take the shorter set, the 12 entrances. So that starts with the 5 faculties, the 6 faculties, each of which is impermanent. And then the objects of those. So visual objects are impermanent, sounds are impermanent, odors are impermanent, tastes are impermanent, tactile sensations are impermanent. So that means the last one is the objects of mental consciousness. So the objects of mental consciousness are all phenomena. The mental consciousness can realize emptiness, which is permanent. So within its sphere, the mental consciousness can realize there is no elephant in this room. The non-existence of an elephant in this room is not something that is appearing to your eye. It's a negation that one understands through the mental consciousness. It can be known, and that is also a permanent phenomenon. All negative phenomena are permanent phenomena like that. All non-affirming negations are permanent phenomena. So, of the 12 dhatus, it's only in the 12 ayatana, it's only in the mental ayatana that there is the objects of mind, that there is a permanent phenomena. But it includes all permanent phenomena, because the mind is capable of knowing all permanent phenomena.
And again, the thing that makes that permanent?
It's not because we said that all permanent phenomena can be found in the 12 entrances and can be found in the 18 dhatus. But you can't find all permanent phenomena in the 5 aggregates. The 5 aggregates only include impermanent phenomena. They don't include the objects of mind and so forth.
What?
Wow, yeah. I've learned from
In
these.
that context, a permanent phenomena is what? The emptiness?
No, what do you mean?
Anything that doesn't change moment by moment.
Non-existence of elephant.
In permanent phenomena are things that change moment by moment.
Well, I meant the other one.
Impermanent phenomena are phenomena.
What are permanent?
Yes,
phenomena?
sorry, I misspoke. Permanent phenomena are things, or I say things, are phenomena that do not change momentarily, but can come into existence, like the emptiness of the mug. Remember, there's something called temporal permanence. But in general, something which is permanent doesn't change moment by moment. The emptiness of the cup, it's not as though the cup is non-inherently existent one instant and then sort of, then you got a little bit inherent and then totally, all the time, not inherently existent. Doesn't change. Like, for instance, the non-obstructing nature of space, ordinary space, akasha. I don't mean the space that you think you see between here and the wall. You say, oh yeah, I see space. I know there's space in this cup or in that box.
So it's a characteristic that doesn't change. That's the permanent.
But when we talk about space, we're talking about not what you see. Is the space is defined as the lack of obstructing contact, which you can infer. You might think there's glass or plexiglass in front, but you go here, even in the dark, you can infer there's space there. You don't see it, you can't perceive it with your senses, but by noticing there's no obstruction, you can infer and understand with the mental consciousness that there is no obstruction there. And that non-obstruction doesn't change. You might try your Jedi mind tricks, but if I put plexiglass there, it's no longer... No, even you put a boulder there, there's still space where the boulder is. Otherwise, the boulder couldn't be there. I use that example when you're meditating on the clear light nature of the mind. Even at the moment when your mind is besieged with many thoughts, just by recognizing there's no way those thoughts could be there unless the mind had clear, unobstructing nature. And then pom, or boom. Once when, I mentioned this before, so you bear with me, the boring stories you heard many times, some of you. When Lama was teaching the 6 yogas of Naropa in Institute of Lama Tsongkhapa, you were there, I think. We were in the basement planning the course, some things about the course, and Lama asked Piero, this monk, big Italian monk, Piero, how's your meditation going? How's this something? And Piero says, oh, Lama, my mind is just like going crazy, you know, so many thoughts going back and forth, planning all these problems. And Lama becomes like Vajrapani, and her eyes become big. That's the best time to meditate on the clear light nature of the mind. It's like all these airplanes are flying, bullets are flying in the sky. At that point, just if you have some experience, let go and just see the clear light nature of your mind. All of those problems you can see. Even though that's not emptiness, you can just recognize that they are not part and parcel of your mind. You can get back to that clear light nature of your mind. Okay? So let us we'll take one more question or two, and then we'll take a lunch break. Yeah.
Yeah, Venerable, following up on that topic about permanent and impermanent phenomena. So mental consciousness that sees the emptiness of an object, in this case for the 18 dhatus we're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
would that be an inferential cognizer, or does that include the direct reality?
It could be both.
Could you
It could
repeat
be.
the question?
He's asking when a mental consciousness takes emptiness as its object amongst these 12 entrances or 18 dhatus, could that be an inferential cognizer? That means an understanding of emptiness which is still not direct, is a correct, real, valid realization, but still with a mental image of emptiness? Or could it be a direct realization of emptiness? And my answer is that it could be both.
So it's the
Yeah,
same.
mental consciousness, yeah.
Could be the subtle part of it, or could be the gross.
Right, but it's still taking a permanent phenomena as its object, main object of comprehension. And well, first, I think, did you have a question? Or you were just provisionally putting your hand up just in case there was time? What?
Everlasting and impermanent. You said that continue, right?
Yeah, there's a difference between everlasting and permanent.
It's contradictory words.
Sounds very similar in English, right? Everlasting sounds like it must. We even say, "Oh, this is. I'm on permanent leave from the army. I'm on permanent disability." You know, it sounds like it means like, you know, as long as you live, you're on disability. But from the Buddhist perspective, philosophical language, permanent means that which does not change moment by moment.
Yeah. Impermanent is.
But everlasting means it may be changing moment by moment, like the mind stream, but keeps on from the beginning to the end, keeps on in a stream, keeps on going.
So everlasting means changing by moment.
Not necessarily. Everlasting means keeps on going. Like say the emptiness of the mind.
Keep on going.
That is permanent, because it's emptiness, but it's eternal.
But keep on going, but still changing.
No. That could, yeah, step back. There's said to be between two things, we say there are 4 alternatives here. So something can be eternal and impermanent, eternal and permanent, eternal and impermanent, non-eternal and permanent, non-eternal and impermanent. So you have to, at lunch, you have to see if you can come up with examples of those 4. I just gave you 2 examples. Like the mind stream is eternal, just the mind stream itself, which is changing moment by moment, from diluted state, beginningless time, into the future, into enlightenment. Even the Buddha state, the Buddha's mind is impermanent. So that is something which is eternal the mind stream, and impermanent. Now take that same mind stream, its ultimate nature. What's its ultimate nature? Emptiness. The emptiness of that mind stream. That emptiness has existed, it didn't come into existence like the emptiness of this cup only came into existence when the cup came into existence. The emptiness of the mind stream has no beginning because the mind stream had no beginning. And it has no end because the mind stream has no end. So that's something which is eternal and permanent. Okay?
Yeah, cup has the previous reason.
Cup has what?
Previous reason, previous condition.
Yeah, yeah.
Also,
Whereas the
you find
beginningless mind has no beginning. It always had a, it is also changing, but the emptiness of the mind has no. You had one quick question.
Yeah, one.
Last one.
When Buddhas actually see the object, are they just seeing it as the appearance, but without the mental consciousness going, this is? I mean, because obviously...
There's two ways. So, to the Buddhist consciousness, without depending on just what appears to the Buddhist consciousness, nothing appears as inherently existent.
But they'll
But the
still see
Buddhist-
the object, right?
The Buddha would have a perception of the imputedly existing object, and we don't have an idea of what that means, like what an imputedly existent, how an imputedly existent cup appears. But there is said to be some appearance which is as soon as we give that name, we impute cup, it appears back to us as inherently existent. So we don't know what that's like. But the Buddha sees that, but the Buddha also knows. There's a big philosophical debates and descriptions because it says, the Buddha has no ignorance. So some people say the Buddha does not see what sentient beings see as inherently existent. But the Buddha is omniscient. He knows what we see. So the Buddha, with his omniscient mind, knowing the minds of sentient beings, like perfect clairvoyance, knows that we see this non-inherently existent cup, like this one, as this. So he sees both. But the way that he sees the inherent existence, it doesn't appear to him just from the side of the object, like it does for us, due to our karma. Because all of his negative karma is eliminated, all ignorance is eliminated, he just sees the dependently arising, imputedly existent cup. But he knows how we perceive that by knowing our minds. Okay? So let's take, what is it again, Venerable? Till 2, maybe, okay, a couple minutes, you'll be late anyway, because it's a couple of minutes after. Just try to, in Tibet, when there were different kinds of rituals that were done by lamas when they would come through a village on the back of a yak. They didn't have time to get off and do the consecration of the stupa. They would say consecration on the back of a yak, very quick. They toss out a very short prayer, toss out some rice, go on. So let's do dedication on the back of the yak. This is without a lot of elaboration. Just recalling that we've created some virtuous karma this morning through the force of our motivation and through the force of listening to virtuous teachings of the Buddha. Think that they will definitely have pleasurable consequences when they ripen on us in cyclic existence, but dedicate them that they not simply be wasted in non-productive ways, but in whatever way they ripen in the future, may they become the material, the sustenance, the fertilization of our continued spiritual practice and realizations, always ourselves aiming to benefit sentient beings up into including the result of enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings.